Okay, and one more announcement. We talked together with Katerina, who will be the moderator of the next panel, also about how to document these celebrations. Probably you noticed that we are video documenting today's conference. There is our photograph, so we will share the photos from the event and all the information with you. But we also are thinking about kind of publication which would document these celebrations. So because I know that there were some questions if we collect the texts and presentations which are presented during the celebrations. Yes, they are, and we are planning together with the Puppeteer magazine to publish some either special publication or one of the editions of the Puppeteer magazine where we would like to capture all what was said and discussed here. And now, finally, I give the floor to Katerina.
And I promise it will be bilingual, not only in Czech, so you can read it, everything in English. Okay, thank you, Martina. Welcome here on the second block. It's very difficult to be enthusiastic and optimistic after this very dark film from the occupation of Czechoslovakia, but I will try to do my best. So welcome here in the second part, because I refreshed the words that were said in the first part: idealism, solidarity, friendship. So continue in this mood. Not in this dark. We will speak in this part about the restoration of UNIMA after the Second World War, after the year 1957, together with my wonderful guests. At the beginning, they will have their presentation, and then we will open the discussion. I'm pretty sure that it will be very interesting and inspiring discussion because it was started before. So we will continue, and we have a very special guest who will open this discussion, and it's Madame Penny Francis. So, no, yeah. So wait, we will have a presentation, and then you will be invited to open the discussion. So we can start because time flies, and as the first, I would like to introduce very well-known, Cristina Grazioli, who will share it with us the first contribution that will be about the relationships between theater art, puppetry art, and UNIMA. And she is professor from Padova, from Italy. Cristina, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I'm not a national delegate, nevertheless I followed the recommendation from a young man in 59, excuse me, not to lose time with the individual thanks. So thanks to everybody. Let's go. I'll begin saying that the proposal of the title is quite demanding and may have a lot of implications. Preparing this paper, I thought about three different topics that imply three different perspectives. I'm not going to approach the three of them, but I would like to mention them nevertheless. The topics would have been the art of puppetry in itself, its aesthetics and evolution, the history and aesthetics of puppets that involve the question of research and study, and the UNIMA as a utopian universe. The backdrop of this topic is the question contained in my title. The art of theater and puppetry arts, the art of puppets and the UNIMA, parallel universes or crossed roads. Sorry. The question I pose comes also from my position. I mean, I'm not so involved in UNIMA. I began to be involved just in the last few years. I'm not a UNIMA member. So I look at UNIMA from the outside, and my perspective is necessarily the one of an historian. Till some years ago, I knew UNIMA only cursorily, although I've been researching on the field of puppetry for many years. On one hand, I didn't have occasions to meet UNIMA. On the other hand, I must say that maybe I was not so attracted by this word that seemed to me not to be so open to research and somehow also skeptical regarding academic world. Then I was invited to Targoviste conference by the wonderful training commission, and I discovered a word. It's true that I knew some people before, but I never met them in the context of a UNIMA community. So I began to feel deeply fascinated by this word and people who really and concretely were looking for something to share in common, but seen from different perspectives. Second episode, UNIMA International asked me to be the curator of the 19th anniversary UNIMA exhibition, a huge challenge. I accepted, not without hesitation, and not last to try to answer the question involved in the title of my paper. So I tried to go back to the title and to explain it. I go along with relationship. Theater and performing arts are for me, first of all, relationships. There is theater and performing arts, and there is puppetry. There is history and aesthetics of performing arts and the history of puppetry. Then the puppet theater and the UNIMA, the history of puppet theater and the history of UNIMA. Within this context of relationships, we can consider other questions. For instance, I'm very interested in the relationship between the avant-garde artist and the avant-garde puppeteers and all of them with UNIMA, but it's another topic. We could sum up all these questions with another one. Do the word of puppetry and the word of UNIMA coincide? This would have been the first topic, but I don't approach it, but I just mentioned, so the possible influences between puppeteers and other theatrical forms and vice versa. But I go to the second topic, to study puppet theater. So the relationship between history of theater and performing arts and the history of puppetry in the context also of UNIMA studies. Reading different UNIMA documents, mainly around the Renaissance 1957, I was impressed from the will to affirm the study of puppetry as an autonomous discipline, so as the scholars of Theaterwissenschaft, the history of performing arts, did at the beginning of the 20th century. And I was also impressed by the recurrence of the proposal of creating an international research center on puppetry and by the consciousness of the tasks implied, for instance, the necessary autonomy from other science, for instance, in particularly from literary history and folklore. Maybe it's worth to remind that theater discipline as an academic discipline, history of theater, was founded at the beginning of the 20th in different countries, first of all in Germany, then other countries follow. And in these UNIMA documents from after 57, I found the same urgency and aims expressed in the programs that conceived the new discipline at the beginning of the century, with a discipline with its own peculiarities. Jan Malik spoke about Puppentheatrologie, so a puppetry science. There are a lot of possible examples of these aims, of this need. For instance, recently I read some documents about UNIMA, about UNIMA in Prague in 57, And Jan Malik, speaking about the solidarity that gave impulse to the refoundation, mentioned the effort to intensify the reciprocity and friendship with the same urgency proper to professionals of other arts. Gerald Morris spoke about the need of an artistic acknowledgement of our domain. Another document from 1959 sent to UNIMA from the Puppentheatersammlung in Munich spoke about a conference held in Vienna and of the proposal of the constitution of a research center to be founded in Venice, a center including bibliography and iconography. And this paper informed also about the contributions about non-European cultures, and particularly about Asia, puppets, and shadows. Other example, the documents about the Bucharest conference in 1958. They also spoke and deals often with these proposals in view to creating international center of research on traditional puppetry. Gunther Schnorr, German, approaches different aspects of the study of puppetry and shadow theater, and he showed an incredible consciousness of methodological questions and of the weight of the task. It's interesting that all these material and documents are presented another time in another occasion. I think the UNIMA expert will know this publication. It's very rich. It was an international festival, congress, and exhibition in Liège in August '58. Michael Meschke was there also. And so some months after the Bucharest Congress, in this book collects a lot of interventions and papers of the participants, and it was not an event organized by UNIMA. Nevertheless, UNIMA participates, and a great number of contributors are UNIMA members and main figures. Among other things, among other things, Jan Malik couldn't be there. He sent a letter that is published in this book, and the secretary, Eva Vodikova, read the letter. After this interesting letter, at the end, she announced that the day after, the only point in the agenda would have been the one of the Center of Studies. We can retrace this interest and this need in the origin of UNIMA, and for instance, in the beautiful ex libris of Vesely that underlined also this attention to studies and to a puppetry culture. I think that this incredible impulse and urgency to create an international center of studies has to be read in, or could be read in the context of the utopian spirit of UNIMA. We could say also that so Bauhaus Archive, Bauhaus is not the same as UNIMA, but I want to quote it because we are in the same years and the same context. For the years and the period after 57, I think that these 15 years, 5, 8, 72, we could read this period as a period in which utopian spirit passed into the urgency of reality, of concretizations. So the utopian impulse turns into a need of reality. And it's incredible how many things UNIMA did in these 15 years. Really a lot of activities, a lot of festival congresses, you all know, I think. And among these things, I want to reference again the activity, the publication and editions activity. This UNIMA album, you surely know, of 65, was projected to be published in 7 different languages. I think it is the only example I know of a work conceived to be published in so many languages. It was published, I think, in 5, really, but it's very important. So multilingualism, I think, is to be read also in the utopian spirit of UNIMA. And the fact that today we are all speaking English maybe can let we think about this utopia. Also in the Congress of Liège, I mentioned, we read in this book, they spoke in 6 different languages. So at the end of the 50, there was really the attempt of speaking and communicating in many different languages. There was a part about the political implications, but I think maybe we can come back to this during the discussion, and also to something Michael Meschke wrote in the UNIMA 2000 book about internationalism. We could ask him direct. But I want to finish at the end of my contribution quoting, referring to Jindrik Vesely, referenced by Margareta Niculescu in the book of 2000. And these sentences, this quotation, you can read it also today in the UNIMA website, quoted by Idoia Otegi. Each international convention has its own significance, as have those dedicated to puppetry. The more meetings there are, the more exchanges that take place between nations, the better individual relations are. Collaboration, solidarity, and comradeship are no longer empty words, but the foundation for a better understanding of human problems and the bringing together of nations. So I ask today, can UNIMA still have this purpose? Is this still possible? And today, that exchanges and meetings take place in the physical distance and not concretely, has this compromised this finality? To this sentence, Margareta Niculescu added, is it then still necessary to answer the perpetual question, why UNIMA? And I add, thanks, UNIMA.
Thank you, Christina. We have now a new word in this group, like idealism, solidarity, friendship, and also utopia. Thank you for a new expression, how to characterize UNIMA. And the next speaker will be Masha. Masha Erbelding from the Munich. She's a curator in a Munich City Museum, and she also organizes a Munich International Puppetry Festival, and she will speak naturally about Germany after the war and its role in UNIMA.
So I have still the PQ formula, but I think it's not, it's okay. So I also refrain to thanking everybody, but I have to add that I feel honored to have all these witnesses of this period here, and I am fresh to this area too, so I read the letters of Max Jakob, but perhaps he will tell me more afterwards. So the following presentation is based mainly on the correspondence of the first president of UNIMA after 1957, Max Jakob, which is part of our archive in Münchner Stadtmuseum. As there are not so many documents from East Germany in our collection, this presentation will have a strong focus on West Germany. Before I begin, I present the German personalities that were important for UNIMA in this period.
Please, could you speak a little slower?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Max Jakob, born in 1888, had founded his company Die Hohensteiner in 1921. He was strongly influenced by the Wandervogel youth movement. His company was one of the most famous German glove puppet theater companies. After Second World War, he moved to Hamburg, traveled a lot, worked also for television. In 1953, he transferred the company to younger puppeteers. Hans-Richard Purschke, I'm sorry, but you can lead it. Hans-Richard Purschke, so I'm showing him again, and I'm passing to this. Was born in 1911 in Olomouc in Moravia, was lawyer, amateur puppeteer, one of the most important German researchers in the field of puppet theater history and editor of the magazine Pellico Polacco. He was part of UNIMA Presidium in the first years until the 1980s, and you might all have known him. Harro Siegel, born 1900, studied theater in Munich and art in Kassel. He was teacher at State School for Art Teachers in Berlin and founded a marionette class there. Siegel was also director of Reichsinstitut für Puppenspiel from 1937 to 1945. After Second World War, he was teacher at art school in Brunswick and organized several puppet theater festivals. Karl Schröder, who already had begun his career as professional puppeteer in the 1920s, was one of the most famous artists from the GDR. He was director of the newly founded State Puppet Theater in Berlin and also represented UNIMA GDR. So, 1959, the telegram. UNIMA, uniting puppetry organizations, collectives and individuals from 34 states, had a presidium meeting and a conference in the last days. From its final meeting, the UNIMA Presidium sends a sincere wish that the foreign ministers' debate of the four great powers may proceed in a positive way and come to a constructive conclusion. In the correspondence of Max Jakob, there's a copy of a statement under oath of Hans-Richard Purschke from 21st November 1959. Purschke declares that he didn't propose the request to send this telegram to the Foreign Ministers' Conference in Geneva together with Eric Collard during the meeting of Presidium in Paris in June 1959. What had happened, and why does Purschke want to distance himself officially from this telegram? The East-West Foreign Ministers' Conference in Geneva with the Soviet Union, US, France and Great Britain was an international meeting. And today we know the last one, dealing with German reunification, but didn't come to a solution. A second important issue was disarmament and nuclear weapons. Since 1955, the US had deployed nuclear weapons in West Germany. Massive protests of scientists, intellectuals, and the public in Germany couldn't stop this. Before I continue with UNIMA and this telegram, let's take a short look on the development of Germany and German puppet theater after the Second World War. A divided history for East and West Germany. In both parts of Germany, there is a hunger for culture, that even real hunger, total destruction of many cities, cold winters, etc. couldn't stop. So very soon in both Germanies, puppeteers began to perform again. In the Soviet zone and later GDR, puppet theater is declared the fourth branch of performing arts. While private theater struggles against limitation and obstructions due to the repertory, which doesn't fit in socialistic times, new state puppeteers are founded, 10 till 1962. The state theaters are bound to perform only for children till the middle of the 1960s. First regular meetings of puppeteers began in 1947. In West Germany, there's almost no discussion about personal guilt and involvement in National Socialism and in puppetry. This discussion will come much later in the 1970s and 1980s. The puppeteers that had survived continued to play and only made small changes in their repertory. Only in quarrels with rivals, and there were a lot of quarrels, they steered up the path to harm the competitor's reputation. Companies are mostly private and have to be small to survive. One or two players, only a few bigger ensembles exist. While old stars like Fritz Gerhard's, Harro Siegel, the Hohensteiner and traditional companies continue, there are a few young artists and companies that try to find a new aesthetics for puppetry. Some names, we already had some of them. Das kleine Spiel and die Spieldose from München, Die Klappe from Göttingen, Harry Kramer, Albrecht Rosa. In 1947, a new association of professional puppeteers is founded. But already in 1949, Fritz Wortelmann found another association for amateurs and professionals. The old association is dissolved. Regional and personal rivalries, for example, between Wortelmann and Harro Siegel, Wortelmann and Puschke, mark this early period in West German puppetry. While the GDR gets part of the Warsaw Pact, the Federal Republic of Germany signs the Paris Contracts, gets part of the NATO. Till 1969, the Hallstein Doctrine was in force. The FRG would not establish or maintain diplomatic relations with any state that recognized the GDR, which meant big difficulties for both congresses in FRG in 1960 in Brunswick-Bochum and in 1966 in Munich, which both included companies and delegations from GDR. For people, and naturally puppeteers in both Germanies and the world, a constant fear of a third world war accompanied the whole Cold War period with its several crises. So back to the telegram. Struggling for balance. Let's get back to UNIMA and Puschke's reaction on the telegram. The content is not the problem. Puschke also is for peace and against nuclear weapons. His resistance is a symptom of the distrust between East and West marking these first years of UNIMA in times of Cold War. Puschke doesn't want the UNIMA to act politically. He fears that UNIMA is being misused for political purposes by the members from communist countries. He writes in November 1959, again to Max Jakob, "I fear we have built on glass, and there can be shards easily. A perpetual tug of war, permanent breaking tests. We representatives from the West have to account to our ministries, and I wouldn't know how to take the responsibility for such a telegram in my report for the Foreign Office." When puppeteers from Czechoslovakia, France, Switzerland, from East and West Germany, Austria, Poland, Sweden, Great Britain, Yugoslavia, Hungary, and other countries met on the first European Week of Puppetry that Harro Siegel organized in Brunswick in 1957, General Secretary Jan Malik discussed the restoration of UNIMA with his friends from the West. They reached 3 gentlemen's agreements, and there were only gentlemen in this agreement, no women, a consequence of the mistrust I already mentioned. General Secretary and President should never be from the same bloc. There shall be a balance between East and West in the Presidium. And UNIMA is an association of individuals, of personalities, not of states and nations. The following years are marked by the struggle for this balance. Looking at the restoration of UNIMA from today, it is really astonishing that UNIMA elects a German for the first president after the Second World War, and that there's no, or perhaps no official, discussion about German participation at all. A lot of puppeteers had suffered and lost relatives and friends in the Second World War. Erich Koller, for example, was a survivor of the ghetto of Theresienstadt. This fact can only be explained by the connections and friendships between European puppeteers at that period. Max Jakob had a network of friends in France, Great Britain, Sweden, among others. His company was famous in Europe, and also Jakob profited from the Nazi regime, and he played a lot for soldiers at the front. He was known to be no Nazi himself. For example, as we heard already, he had helped the French puppeteer Marcel Temporel and saved his son Jean-Loup. when he was forced to go to Germany. So, how big was the influence of communist officials in UNIMA? On the one hand, there are some very propagandistic performances, for example from North Korea and sometimes also from the GDR. Puschke reports from the 1959 meeting in Paris that Charlotte Gente from GDR accused him to be hostile to the East in his magazine Palico Palaco, and that it therefore will be censored in GDR. The question of flags during the Congress in Munich 1966 had to be discussed with the culture ministries and other officials. They're puppeteers that don't get permission to travel, and naturally political issues play a big role in the selection of shows for festivals. On the other hand, the UNIMA leaders deny this political influence. In 1964, Karl Schröder answers to a letter of Uli Balmer from Switzerland, who claims that UNIMA had a communist touch. Please consider, dear Uli Balmer, me. 3 years ago, Rudolf Halbaum was member of the Presidium instead of me. At the Congress in Warsaw, Halbaum, he is member of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, SED, was not re-elected. Instead of him, I was elected, and I am not a member of any party. So, UNIMA, what is it good for? Max Jakob, who had to react on this criticism and other criticism in Germany, and who tried to spread the idea of UNIMA in Germany, let little Moritz answer on this provoking question. For German puppeteers, he explained how with the support of UNIMA, position and quality of puppet theatre in Germany could be improved. With the help of a strong international association, German cultural politics would finally be forced to see the importance and the possibilities of puppetry. By the exchange with puppeteers from abroad, he also hoped to solve the problem of artistic quality. Comparison, inspiration, dialogue, all this would help German puppetry to find new ways. But most important for him really was, I think, the idea of peace, and working for peace by the means of personal encounters. For Max Jakob, the contact, the friendship with individuals is more important than every official announcement. So he appeased both sides and helped UNIMA survive all these breaking tests. In an answer from 1962 to Fritz Wortelmann, who complains about a telegram by Czechoslovakian UNIMA congratulating GDR UNIMA on building the wall, Jakob writes, "Today we live in a different world than in 1930. At that time it was easy to found an international federation. There was no political discord. When we met in Prague in 1957, there was hardly anyone amongst us who had any illusions about this new world in which we are forced to live. But we were all inspired by the desire to re-establish the old bonds, to overcome everything ugly, and to start anew in the spirit of friendship and tolerance. We cannot judge how far letters of sympathy for the struggle for peace have been written voluntarily or under voluntary coercion. Of course, if we would bother about these things, we could probably no longer have any relationships. But these are a vital necessity. More than ever, encounter and cohesion are of greatest importance. The fact that we Germans are acknowledged as regular members, that at present the President is a member of the German Federal Republic, is an essential sign of goodwill. After all, what still burdens the relationship of other countries with Germany, we should not think of our interests, but also of the interest of all others. So even if soon after the restoration of UNIMA, national sections were made possible, and even if the theoretical predominance of the East got more and more apparent, Jakob trusted in goodwill and sincere friendship. While Puschke feared that UNIMA would be taken over by the East, Jakob wrote to Puschke in November 1967, shortly before his death. "You know as well as I do that there are people with political ambition in UNIMA. But I can only smile about this and think they may have political ambition, but UNIMA has no political importance at all. Or has it?"
Thank you for your very nice contribution with many, many documents. The next speaker will be from the different perspective. I would like to welcome here Nina Monova from Russia. So we now move to the East and see how it was from the Eastern point of view. Nina Monova, for your information, but I'm pretty sure that you know her, is a representative of Sergei Obraztsov Theater and Museum, and she is here the head of the literature department. So, Nina, are you prepared? Yes, perfect. Thank you.
UNIMA has never been a bridge between two completely different worlds. Yes, it's okay. Okay. UNIMA has never been a bridge between two completely different worlds for the reason that these words were in fact one word, the art of puppetry. The Cold War was indeed the scene, the background for UNIMA's existence from 1958 to the early 1990s, and was its antithesis. Among those who began the revival of UNIMA, many experienced all the horrors of real war. For example, Josef Skupa and Sergei Obraztsov. And I think that it's very important that in this period before the 1958 was many meetings between puppeteers from different countries. And for example, in September 1937, it is a very difficult period in the Soviet Union because it is the beginning of time of Stalinism. You understand, you remember. And in Moscow, where was a meeting with two puppeteers, and one Miguel Prieto from Spain, and Sergei Obraztsov from Soviet Union. And just a moment. Miguel Prieto was Spanish artist, set designer, head of the puppet theater La Tarumba, who arrived in Moscow for the 5th Theatre Festival. And Sergei Obraztsov, creator of genre of ballades with puppets, actor and director of the Central Puppet Theater, the experimental lab of the puppet genre. And during this meeting, Miguel Prieto shared a very interesting secret of a puppet theater with Sergei Obraztsov. Miguel told that my small theater, La Tarumba, only 4 puppeteers, is a real military weapon as effective as a rifle. And this Spanish puppeteer who played performances for soldiers at the front of the Civil War already found an answer for the question that at that time tormented Sergei Obraztsov. In his book, Actor with a Puppet, he admitted, can puppet theater be really necessary? Can it create performances of the same power as drama, theater, or cinema? A few years later, in 1941, Obraztsov himself would find the answer to his question when fate would send his theater into the heat of military action. He will play performances for soldiers, in hospitals for wounded, and even play a performance for only one single spectator, a soldier dying in the hospital. And we know very well that in 1958 were created some national centers of UNIMA. And it is time of creation of the Soviet Union UNIMA Center. And when the Soviet Union UNIMA Center was created, a window in the Iron Curtain appeared. In Soviet Union UNIMA Center, there are 110 states puppet theaters and individual members. And Soviet Union included some republics, you remember. And it is very interesting because in this time was created new language of Soviet puppetry. Because, for example, a new young generation, young actors and directors came because in 1959 a new puppet theater department was opened in Leningrad. And this new language of Soviet puppet theater debunking the past authorities of the 30s and 50s period and creating new ones. The birth of something new in the art always dangerous, and the way is not easy. And I want to tell about the fate of Soviet director Boris Ablinin. And so, yes, who worked as director at Central Puppet Theater under the leadership of Sergei Obraztsov during in 1956 and 1962. It was during these years that the Soviet Union arose, and due to this, Ablinin often went to the UNIMA festivals. And as you know very well, Obraztsov's authority was enormous, and he was recognized by government, and Sergei Obraztsov was a dictator, like in Soviet Union, you understand, in it's you understand me well, yes. So, and it's very interesting because Boris Ablinin worked together with Sergei Obraztsov, but Boris Ablinin was like a reformer of new language, and made way for the theater, which is fundamentally different from the Obraztsov style, and more similar than the new European quests. And I ask me and all of us, who knows, maybe it were the UNIMA festivals what became the catalyst in the breath of a new language, and provocate the search of Boris Ablinin and them some directors of Soviet Union. Because in the years 1962, 1967, Ablinin was the chief director of the Moscow Puppet Theater and the artistic director of the training studio at the theater, where we staged the play The Lark by Jean Anouilh. In the 1967, this performance turned out to be an art explosion in the theater of Moscow, and became a legend of the puppet theater. It arose in the years known as stagnation when the Soviet Union again made all against any manifestation of non-conformity. And Ablinin decided to ignore this rule and even decided combine different styles in the one performance. He used Brecht acting style in The Lark. And it is very interesting because the traditional theater screen disappear. And during the play, real actors play with huge grotesque masks and small puppets made out of newspapers. And the role of Jeanne d'Arc was played by actress Nina Shmelkova at right photo. And her talent of dramatic actors and virtuoso puppeteer was admired. In 1972, the theater was closed and all decorations, the set design, were burned. And it is very pity when political influence break the artist's work. But decades later, when opening the 8th International Festival of Puppet Theaters in Ryazan, it is a city in Russian Federation, and the director of the Ryazan Puppet Theater and director of festival, Oskar Tager, recalled the Moscow Festival in 1976. Only to Moscow I could fully understand that puppet theater is. I discovered the unknown, magical, ancient art of the peoples of the world. I was impressed. I really wanted the audience of Ryazan and my colleagues to see it. And I said, there is going to be a festival. Thanks to UNIMA, the connection between times continues. In the year of the 19th anniversary of UNIMA at the Ryazansky Smatrine, a project of the Youth Commission will take place. It is called Youth in Progress. In cooperation with UNIMA Russia, this project to fulfill our professional creative exchange among young puppeteers around the world. And 8 participants from different parts of the world will arrive in Ryazan a week before the festival starts. And this year, under the guidance of experienced puppeteers and teachers, Boris Konstantinov and Viktor Antonov, a capsule performance will be presented in the first days of festival. And as a special part of the festival's program, the main topic of youth project is We All Live Under the Same Moon. And I hope that my topic show us at which way UNIMA go to maybe to create it, some relations between art of puppetry and between people. And I hope that it is one world for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. And our last speaker will be Carriot Astle, Dr. Carriot Astle, who is president of British UNIMA and also president of Research Commission UNIMA, and also teacher, researcher, and puppeteer. And she teaches at Royal Central School of Speech and Drama and also at Exeter University at the theatre department.
Thank you. Thanks, Katerina. I've got a lot of bits and pieces here to negotiate, so just give me a minute because I need to put up the slides. Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for hosting me during this important event. I think UNIMA in my life has been in my life since around 1998, and much more so in the last 10 years. And I think, like many of the organizations, not only artistic, but that were set up pre and post the Second World War, it's thinking about what its purpose is and thinking about what its role is, and there's a lot of discussion to be had around this. Personally and artistically and professionally, the values of diversity, international collaboration and exchange have always been very important parts of my life and always very important parts of what UNIMA hopefully what UNIMA purports to do. I was asked to talk about the history of British UNIMA. This is a brief history. UNIMA in the UK is entirely unfunded and run by volunteers in the UK. However, despite its poor status, the partner ideals of development of the art, international collaboration and education have always been part of its remit. The British Centre of UNIMA was set up by Gerald Maurice in 1963, and I was delighted to hear him cited by Christina earlier, demanding artistic acknowledgement of our domain. We know that the centres and indeed UNIMA itself has been set up by ardent, energetic and passionate activists. Maurice was always an activist in support of puppet theatre. He'd previously set up the British Toy Theatre Guild, which was renamed the British Puppetry and Model Theatre Guild in 1925, which was an organisation intended to promote the work of various kinds of puppetry, including both traditional and more contemporary puppetry. After the Second World War, Maurice saw the great value in British puppeteers being linked to an international organisation and effectively built the links with UNIMA. He was a prolific writer and insisted upon the role of publication, of reviewing, of commenting on puppet theatre, and in particular on puppet theatre coming from different parts of the world, in order to increase awareness of what puppetry can and should do. He wrote in a variety of journals and newspapers, including the Journal for Circus and Variety and also for the British Theatre newspaper, as well as a dedicated puppetry journal. During the 1950s, in the UK, there were two puppet theatres. I think it's quite interesting that neither of them at this point were in England. One was in Scotland and one was in Wales. The first English puppet theatre opened in the 1960s and has become the most well-known one, and that's the Little Angel Theatre. Maurice was succeeded by the energetic puppeteer Jan Bussell, who later became UNIMA president. Bussell and his wife Anne Hogarth ran the Hogarth Puppets and worked very hard to develop the form, insisting upon good writing, good staging and good performance in all of their shows. They toured throughout the world and for many years were one of the main faces of British puppetry. In preparing for this talk, I went into the British UNIMA archives, which I had not looked at before, and I found this fascinating file of correspondence between Jan Bussell, international UNIMA colleagues and representatives of other artistic organisations, including the ITI, the International Theatre Institute. Bussell saw very clearly the importance of two things. Firstly, that the relationship and collaboration between British and international puppeteers was not only welcome, but in fact essential to developing the art of puppetry, because of its exposure to different kinds of forms and practices. But secondly, and not less importantly, that the value of international communication and partnership beyond politics was crucial, and in some cases assisting through very difficult political times. So in this file we have letters from Jan Bussell, then the president of UNIMA, urging for the freedom of the UNIMA Secretariat to continue their activities. A letter dated the 10th of September 1968 notes that we, not only UNIMA members, but the whole country are watching with great admiration the wonderful self-control and courage of the Czechoslovak people on their ordeal. At this time, it is desperately important for the Presidium of UNIMA to be able to sit around a table together. He then goes on and confirms his support for the continued free development of UNIMA and promises support for this via various lobbying activities, which could be called political or not. I think it depends on how we define politics. He says in another letter that day, "It is with distress that I learn that our General Secretary, Jan Malik, has been experiencing difficulty in carrying out the normal activities of his work for UNIMA. Please offer all possible help and encouragement, both privately and officially, to our General Secretary." He also expressed the view noted by Masha just now that it's preferable to have executive committee representatives from different regions around the world. John raised the question of politics within UNIMA, and we've all been starting to comment upon it. So here's a little bit of my commentary on that. We are all involved in political actions in every day of our lives, whether we call those political or not. UNIMA, both internally and externally, is an organisation which involves and includes politics, but is not a political party. So while we use diplomacy and care in our interactions and iterations, it's also, for me, relevant and crucial that politics in some way is discussed at least, and that consciousness is raised at least, whether it's with a big P or a small p. Humanitarian, gender, diversity and inclusion initiatives are indeed all part of politics. We know that some years ago a puppet festival proposed in the West Bank was summarily cancelled at the last minute by the Israeli Ministry of Culture. UNIMA expressed regret but did not condemn this. Only 3 years ago, we knew of the imprisonment of Spanish puppeteers for having a show which mocked politics and the church in Madrid. This again was discussed at a UNIMA meeting, and it was agreed that people should express their views privately rather than officially. But from my perspective, I think it's important that these questions were at least raised and discussed. In 2013, I hosted a symposium in London on women and puppet theatre. And during the preparation of this symposium, I received two anonymous death threats about setting up a symposium on women and puppet theatre, which highlighted certain attitudes to me. So we all make political decisions and we act within political environments. Jan Bussell was succeeded by John Blundell, who was also elected to the Executive Committee of UNIMA. Blundell was a puppet maker and director who founded Cannon Hill Puppets in Birmingham. Blundell was hugely influenced by the puppets of Eastern European companies and by Abratsov's work in Moscow. He strove, influenced by these companies, he strove for excellent design and the setting up of larger puppetry performance teams, which would include designers, performers, and directors, which up until this point was much more common in Eastern European and Soviet puppetry. These three men were highly instrumental in establishing the principles for British UNIMA as being an organisation dedicated to the energetic development of the art of puppetry with a special focus on international connections and collaborations. We can't underestimate the importance of our special guest here, Penny Francis, in furthering national and international support for the form. Penny has been long involved and very active within UNIMA. She remains the Vice President of British UNIMA. She was the prime mover and founder of the London-based Puppet Centre, which opened in 1974, running events and festivals and many other activities. Also in the setting up of a major international puppet festival in London in 1979, bringing more international groups and adult puppet theatre to wider audiences. She also set up the UK's only degree in puppetry, has been a prolific publisher and has been an advocate for puppetry throughout her life. Ray De Silva, director of Norwich Puppet Theatre, also for some years president of British UNIMA, brought together some of the numerous puppetry organisations in the UK in 1999 who grouped themselves under the title of Puppeteers UK. So during the 80s and 90s, British UNIMA was active in bringing together puppeteers to advocate for the art form and to promote collaboration between international puppeteers. It's also played a very important part in the promotion of research and scholarly activities through annual lectures, symposia and meetings. Education and the development of the form has always been important. Together with various institutions, including the Central School of Speech and Drama, the Puppet Centre, Royal Holloway, University of London, and the Little Angel Theatre, it's hosted speakers and workshops by, amongst others, John Bell, Philip Jonty Company, Handspring Puppet Company, and Colette Garrigan. It's also been a partner with other bodies on symposia on women in puppetry, object theatre, puppetry and politics, actors and puppets. These days, its activities are primarily dedicated to the production of Puppet Notebook, its publication, an annual lecture, support for festivals and sharing of international information. Currently, it's exploring ways to link up better with other UK organisations to bring about a stronger voice for British puppetry in what we can only describe as extremely uncertain and difficult political and cultural times in the UK. So, in relation to development in the future, I'm not going to say much because I think that this is the remit of the next panel. But it is essential that we are in dialogue about the particular and specific circumstances of our political times, freedom and support for traditional and contemporary puppet artists, and engagement in their worlds, enabling the art to develop and progress is clearly the most important thing. So the key question is, what now? Thank you.
Thank you, Clariette. Thank you. Thank you for the bridge for the next panel. But before we quit this one, I would like to summarize it because we have heard many points of view, many documents. I think for me, it will be my opinion, UNIMA is something very fragile. I will borrow the sentence you said, built on glass, because every relationship is somehow built on glass because we have to take care of it and to make it alive. I hope UNIMA will survive for next 100 years because we, and I think can see the passion in your faces, we will take care of it and we will make it alive. And for me, the main message of this panel where like former enemies met is forget the nationality, be puppeteers. That's my message for me. From these very nice contributions, and that's what I wanted to say before I put the microphone to our very special guest, Penny Francis. We were speaking about the politics, and my former question was, again, how it worked as a political, not forget about politics. We said many things. It just came to my mind that we forgot about the art. And puppetry art. So my question for Penny is not about the relationships in the Cold War. How this possibility of meetings between people from different parts of the world help to improve the puppetry art? And please, you have the privilege to start. You can move, or you can take a seat and I will move. It's up to you.
I'm glad you asked. For me, it's the most important thing. I've been looking at puppetry without doing it for years and years and years. I joined UNIMA in 1966, and I've been hovering on the edges of it, taking part in various commissions and other activities of UNIMA. I am a passionate, but I mean passionate, internationalist. The basis of my life is international relations and theatre. And I don't just mean puppet theatre, theatre in general. I love theatre. I go to the theatre, all kinds of theatre, as often as I can. And I believe that the advance of puppetry in our time, and probably always, has been the content of the shows, the dramaturgy, what the puppeteers have actually played. One of the great examples for me is Michael Meschke in Sweden, who has put on performances which are utterly memorable, but it was because of the dramaturgy that he chose, such as Uburoa, and some other performances which were simply mind-boggling. And the performances of Drac that was another company who took the whole art form forwards, because not of their money, not because of but because of what they did, what they showed. It was a theatre of protest, very cleverly concealed in some ways. And there have been other companies. My own beloved Faulty Optic, a little tiny company in England, who I believe were also responsible for taking the art form forward because of what they did, the content of their shows, which was utterly original. No other kind of theatre could have done what they were doing. And that's another thing that I love about puppetry, that it is absolutely unique amongst the theatre arts. It does things that nobody else can do, not even wonderful dance companies and opera companies. Puppetry is itself, and it needs to be accentuated to the other art forms, that puppetry is not only unique, but it's also extremely difficult to do well, really, really difficult, and it needs support, as nearly all the arts do. It needs money, it needs funding, and when it has good funding, it very often produces theatre which is simply wonderful. So please, everybody go on lobbying the arts organizations in their country for more support in terms of resources. In our country, I'm afraid, it's very, very poor. Puppetry is still an outsider, wouldn't you say?
Totally.
We're a very literary nation. I blame Shakespeare, because he was rather good, and it was very difficult to live up to his standards. But we are a nation of words and wordplay, and I love that. But it's very tricky to find a dramaturgy which is purely puppetry's dramaturgy and what puppetry can do best. Anyway, that's I'm setting out my stall, and I don't know where we're going from here. Are we asking for questions? Or I would like some response to what I have said. Anybody here to respond?
So is there a question? Or the response for Danny Francis, who wants to contribute for something? No? No response. Okay, so I think we... Yes.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Well, I will be very brief, and I think that we've been talking about what the value of international collaboration does and can do to bring people together, but obviously to bring them together in pursuit of the art form and the development of the art. And I know that we've had conversations about considering the relatively poor status of puppetry support, infrastructure, organisational funding support for puppetry in the UK. One of the things that we have spoken of many times is how important it is to have excellent quality international work to showcase that potential that you have talked about. And I think, certainly, at least one of the people I mentioned, John Blundell, was enormously influenced by his experience of international companies and how that could improve the state of the art. So that's one of the reasons why something like UNIMA is important.
Well, the word utopia has been mentioned a few minutes ago. And I think utopia is so important, and I remember that there would be no contemporary theater without a puppet play that was invented by some students or pupils. Ubu-Roi. It's the base of all contemporary theater. It should not be forgotten. And it was more or less improvised puppet theater. And it has been played by many companies in many different forms, and they were learning from each other. And I remember we had some shows in Bochum, for instance. We still had this East-West problem. And the festival in Bochum, for instance, was the first international festival to invite, against all odds, companies from the eastern neighbors. From Poland, the Drag came, Wrocław came. So we met them, and they had new forms. And they had really new forms. And they were different also from the export of the state companies, like Hungary or Moscow. They had the very formal big things, big companies, but we saw the opposite under the conditions, and they were supported basically by friends. Friends in a position to organize festivals in Bochum, in Braunschweig, in Munich. These meetings were so important, and they were really the vitamin for UNIMA in those bad times. It really worked. We can see it today.